Hey guys, it's Skybird here, and as you can see, things are different. We'll talk about that here in a second, but this video is basically just going to focus on a couple of things. First of all, the channel seems to be doing pretty well so far, so I'm very thankful for that. We're going to be taking a look at a resin cast here and talking about that, and we're also going to be taking a look at a build, which I guess I will sort of sneak peek to incentivize you to stay, but it's this guy right here, my Pohatu Mystika build. We're not going to be doing a breakdown of that in this video, but I think I will be making one in the near future because that is a pretty highly requested model of mine. But before we get into any of that, make sure that if you like the content that you like and subscribe. We're growing pretty quick. We got 100 subscribers in the last month, so that's thank you very much, first of all. Second, I'm actually filming on my birthday, which is kind of crazy. I'm not even lying about that. I'm 31 and I don't like it, but hey, you know, you age. Anyway, so let's get right on into it. First things first, yes, things are different. And this is actually a pretty subtle change, although the microphone is a little more to address. But it's very simply just moving my ring light from being directly in front of me, mounted on the wall, to my tripod, which I already had sitting kind of over here off in the corner, and just having it over here at an angle, which makes things look so much cleaner, so much nicer. And I just did it basically because I wanted, you know, the light out of my eyes, and I didn't want it just glaring back at you in the camera, right? So this way it makes it much easier for me to look at the camera. It makes things look a lot more crisp on camera as well. I don't have a clamera. And yeah, now the change with the microphone, that was intentional because I actually need to be able to work beneath the microphone, which I couldn't do before, because this space off to the side here is actually what I'm using for my top-down builds, which you guys seem to be liking. So I am planning on making more of those videos here in the future, including, you know, different types of weapons and things that I've designed for Bionicle, Rahi, and just other builds. Just stay tuned in the channel. You're gonna love what you see coming up next. But yeah, really happy with how that has come out. So outside of all of that, though, it meant that I actually had to mount the microphone itself to the wall, which I know seems really bizarre. I mean, maybe it's something people do. I honestly don't know. But I didn't buy anything to do this. I just drilled a metal rod down in the wall and sunk the whole arm over that rod. So that's kind of it for now. But it allows me to move it, fold it up into the wall, and it works out well enough. So yeah. Outside of that, though, we did pull a resin cast. I was going to say a resin pour today. And I'm pretty happy with how it came out. Before we show that, I wanted to show that I have a brand new mold that I'm using. This is technically the third pour that I've done with it, but the second one, which I was going to do for a live pour video that I'm working on in the background here, is this one right here. And the reason I showed you it from the back first is because there are no markings in the back at all. It is perfectly clean, and I'm super happy about that. The way I was able to achieve this with a one-piece mold was actually making sure that my cutting lines actually go along this edge here. Now you might just ask the question, well, why not do a two-part mold? And I do plan to, but right now I'm a little bit constrained in terms of space and the equipment that I have. There are a handful of things that I still need to get my hands on to make two-part molds easier to create. That said, I actually did make a two-part mold for this Komau, but I did realize that there's one kind of, I want to say caveat to two-part molds, and that is that when the two parts come together, you really want the flat edges to be like as flat as possible when they touch each other, because if they slide past each other, that actually drags the silicone. There's a lot of friction involved there, and that can pull it away from whatever piece you're trying to cast and create voids, which will essentially just fill with more resin. It's more cleanup for you, and doesn't look very good, right? So in hindsight, yeah, it's definitely something I will fix in the future for my two-part molds, but this mold has been doing pretty well. And like I said, the only thing that I need to do is just make sure I cut along those hard edges, right? That is difficult to do because it does take a lot of finesse and a lot of patience to get it out of there, but doing so obviously yields really nice results, as you have seen. One of the better masks that I think that I pulled, which I poured yesterday, is this one right here. And this is my first attempt at matching Lego's old classic brown. I think I did a pretty good job. You'll be surprised to know that Lego's browns, pretty much all of them, have a lot of variation in them as well. So if I take a mask like the Kakama, for example, and I compare it with my brown Akaku mask, there's actually a difference there. The Akaku has a warmer, more saturated tone than the Kakama does. And it's not just that mask. The Ruru and the Matatu are both different for me as well. And this seems to hold true just generally speaking. thing. So every Kakama I've pulled out has looked one way. Every Akaku I've pulled out has looked another way. You get the idea, right? So it's definitely one of the fun colors to kind of mess with, but it's also a little more freeing, I guess, because you have a lot more range of variation to that color than something like a blue or a red, which has stayed pretty consistent from Lego through, the decades, yellow especially as well. So really happy with how this came out though. But again, the mask is a resin cast. It is not a real, proto or misprint brown comb out, but it does look the part. I'm pretty happy with that. That said, obviously you're getting a little peep of my super posable Taraga builds, and I may end up remaking that video here in the future. I believe I posted a video on that build on the channel like maybe a year ago, but I could be wrong about it. So now that I've got the setup here for the overhead builds, it's going to make it a lot easier to do videos like that in the future, and hopefully we can just keep my camera quality looking this nice for those builds. A little harder to control the lighting at that angle. That said, moving on to the next build here, we're taking a look at my Pohatu Mystika build. And this one here uses no custom parts, but if you want to take a look, if I want to give you a little bit of a teaser for my actual custom Mystika builds, these have gotten a lot of attention. I've really loved designing these characters as a whole. Now, granted, this one here uses a lot of parts from Galva as well as some custom parts that I made. So clearly not actually able to be built, but just playing around with the build itself, the main bulk of it is all just standard parts. Pretty much the only custom stuff that you see here is the armor, the weapons, and the masks, essentially. And so there's a lot more freedom here than it would first appear. With my build for Pohatu here, I'm really happy with this build in general. Obviously, a lot of people have really liked the build I did for the working propeller claws, which I'm very pleased with. But in and of themselves, they are just part of a whole, right? And so obviously with the Mystika, the thing, their sort of claim to fame was the fact that they were mostly silver, right? They were a highlight of silver, which I think, it works in some scenarios. It has a lot there's a charm to it, but I don't think it works in the original context, which is why I chose to rebuild them. The Mystika are a very popular choice for a lot of people to revamp, and I think that's because there's just a lot of room. There's a lot of meat on the bone, so to speak. And with this build here, it's a really approachable build because not only are many of these pieces actually quite common and relatively inexpensive, but also they appear in basically every one of the 6 colors. Really, the only exception to that is this Technic triangle here, which I believe appears in 5 of the 6 original colors. It also appears in tan though, so if I wanted to introduce tan into this color scheme, I can with that piece, or I can just use silver on the back of this as well, and that's going to work just fine. It is a silver character after all. But that said, I think the overall build for this character looks absolutely stunning on a shelf wherever you put it. I really need to create a build for something to hold it up with so I can have it in a flying pose or something, but I absolutely love the build in and of itself, and I will be doing a deep dive into this build, including a breakdown in the near future. So again, make sure that you're subscribed because it will help not only the channel, but hey, you'll get rewarded. You'll get to see cool things. That said, this body itself is actually built around the Borak arms themselves because those are available in all 6 of the Mata colors, as well as all 6 of the secondary colors if you want to change things up a bit. And because it's built around those arms, it means that the waist here actually has the ability to bend, right? The character can lean back and lean forward, and I can bump my microphone. So it works out super well. It's really dynamic. The hips obviously have ball joints in them. The shoulders have ball joints, so you have a lot of movement there. And there's also some variation between the builds, between the characters as well. So I wanted to keep the fact that Onua and Pohatu are essentially the short characters from, from Mata and Nuva forms. And the main reason for that is because although I think that Pohatu Fantoka does a reasonable job of representing the original character, obviously there's a color change there, of course, but Onua Mystika, I'm not a huge fan of. It loses a lot of qualities from the original Onua, and though I actually do quite like the mask itself, the weapons leave a lot to be desired, and he's tall. Like, why is he tall all of a sudden? Onua has always been the short one. And yes, I understand there's kind of a story behind that, but again, not a huge deal. So that's pretty much it for this video. I wanted to try and keep it under 10 minutes for you guys. I think I got pretty close. And with that said, of course, if you liked this content, if you of course want to see more, make sure to subscribe. Check out my links in the description below. Not only are we gaining followers here, but we're also gaining followers subscribers, followers on Instagram, as well as on my Discord server as well. So those will be linked in the description below. And as always, if you want to support this type of content and get a couple of perks, which are coming here in the near future, then go ahead and check out my Patreon. And I'm on Threads now, apparently. So I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.